And we're live here, Pankration Philosophy, episode 22. I'm here with Bryce Murphy. Welcome, Bryce.
Thank you for having me, Pacholo.
Oh, for sure. All right, Bryce and I, we go way back. We were in the same sophomore math class.
That's true.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we sat in the same table.
And I think they rotated tables, but for one part,
I think for one part. I distinctly remember that. Anyway, that's not what brought us here. Not sophomore math. But it was mainly MMA. So I'm curious, Bryce, how did you get started, I guess, watching MMA or becoming a fan?
Yeah, so I got started watching MMA about a decade ago at this point.
Okay.
I think it was 2009, and I had a friend in that same high school who was really interested in MMA. He grew up watching Pride and was a big fan of Fedor in particular, and would show me clips of Pride fights and tried for most of my senior year of high school to get me into MMA.
Okay.
So he would come over to my house and he would show me like either new clips that would happen in MMA or these old clips of Fedor. And it's not that I didn't like it at first. I mean, I grew up watching martial arts and Jackie Chan movies and Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that. So there was always something that appealed to me about the clips that he was showing me. But there was something about it where it was like, I know you're going to show me the best stuff. Like, I've watched sports my whole life. I've watched, all sorts of team sports. And so it was like, okay, you're showing me highlights.
Yeah.
This is very obviously curated. And it wasn't until I was watching hockey on Versus, which is no longer a channel. But
right.
That's where the
WEC was
exactly,
on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
And around that time was back when Uriah Faber was the big star of the WEC.
Yeah.
And I actually saw a replay of a fight after watching a hockey game on there where it was Uriah Faber and Mike Brown. Their first fight.
Was their first fight?
Their first fight. And I remember watching just a replay of that, and my friend Tad, who had been trying to get me into MMA at the time, we both know.
Yeah, we both know Tad and his gambling habits
yes,
as well.
That's true. Tad wasted a decent amount of money making bad MMA bets.
Our Japanese friend, who's totally not a homer for Japanese fighters. But yeah, anyway, so you saw Mike Brown, Uriah Faber won. Okay.
Yeah.
Was it just Brown Faber, or was it like the card?
I just saw Brown Faber.
Okay.
And the reason they were showing that is because they were trying to advertise Brown Faber 2, which was coming up at that point. And I watched that fight, and Tad had told me a little bit about what was going on with Uriah Faber and being excited for that fight. And so I texted him and was like, hey, I want to see this fight. I'd never actually sat down and watched an MMA fight as it was happening live before.
Okay.
So I told him I want to watch this fight, and I'm interested. I know who these fighters are. I'm invested in this narrative.
Yeah.
And so we went, and that card happened, and we watched it at my place. And the first fight that I saw on that card, I think it was the co-main event, was Jose Aldo and Cub Swanson.
Oh yeah, wow, names. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny, like looking back. Yeah, 10 years ago, they were pretty much essentially nobody at that time. But yeah.
No,
anyway, so you saw that.
Yeah, and of course I had no idea who either of them were, and obviously 6 seconds, whatever it was,
with that double flying knee
knockout from Jose Aldo, and this was in my head. I had obviously no idea what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so just seeing that of something that even in the highlights I'd never seen before, had no idea was even possible in an MMA fight. That was where it was like, okay, I need to watch more of this.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the most exciting things, one of the most exciting, most exhilarating moments that I'd ever seen in sports. And then obviously you have the fight after that where I'm invested in the narrative and wanted to see what would happen with Faber and Brown. And so just those two fights back to back was such a game changer for me, and I wanted to learn more. And over the years I started to kind of drift in and out, and it was a few years later where I started realizing what the UFC actually was and started watching more of that and following the fighters.
Yeah, that is an interesting fight card. Yeah, just with the emergence of Jose, I guess because he was already in the WEC and scored some finishes, but that was definitely like I'd say probably his coming out. And then Brown, because Brown Faber 2, I remember that's when Faber broke both of his hands, ended up going like a 5-round decision. Let's see, because I think Brown had a couple. Because I remember him defending against Leonard Garcia, and then I think he might have had another one, but I think he then fought Jose, which is how he got the title. But okay, so I guess how did you? So how did you, I guess, when you discovered what the UFC actually was, like what made you, I guess, what kept you invested, like in watching it, or what about the sport? Yeah.
Well, I think the UFC specifically, what helped me transition was the WEC fighters going into the UFC, because at that point I was following Jose Aldo, and I was following Faber and Brown and some of the other, Dominic Cruz and some of the other fighters from the WEC, because that was easy to follow because it was free on TV.
Yeah, free on TV. Yeah.
And so them, all of those fighters being absorbed into the UFC made it an easier transition for me. But also it was that I started to understand that at the time there was more of a hierarchy of, I felt like there was a payoff for, I'm going to watch these fighters rise through the ranks, and then I started to understand, here is a championship fight between a fighter I've invested in, a fighter I've watched, and then they're going to fight the champion of the weight class, and that was compelling to me. And so it felt like as I was just enjoying the sport and all of the things that could happen and the stories within each specific fight, I started to enjoy the larger stories of what's going to happen in this weight class, and what's going to happen when this fighter I've been watching meets this other fighter I've been watching. If that makes any sense.
Oh no, that doesn't make sense, because you get a notion of like a collective narrative. Like there's a narrative of like one fighter of, like, let's say fighter A and then fighter B, knowing that both of them, I mean, will eventually, if they do continue doing well, that they'll eventually meet, and seeing how that happens. I think, yeah. And then there's, I mean, over the years there's been some, I mean, I guess like one of the most prominent for sure is one of the guys we already mentioned, Jose Aldo, and his matchup against Conor McGregor, which built up for years. And I remember we watched that as well, that match. I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did.
And having just being with I remember that was one of the fights where we had a ton of people with us, and just a room full of people completely stunned, and obviously arguments going back and forth, or debates going back and forth between who would win and how it would happen, and nobody saw that being such a fast knockout.
No one did, especially, and just all the overall hype around it. Yeah, was, and I think that's a thing too, just of narrative. I think that's one thing that when people, like, I mean, McGregor's brand is so I guess blown up at this point. But I think just remembering him, like what he could do, is really make you care about his narrative, which is absolutely what makes him extremely successful.
Yeah.
So
and I saw Conor McGregor fight in Vegas before he was headlining.
Right.
I went to MGM right after I graduated college. I went with my dad and saw a fight where
he fought Dustin Poirier, right?
He fought Dustin Poirier. Yeah. It was a card where Demetrius Johnson headlined against Chris Carriaso.
Yes.
Of all people.
Yeah. Very.
Yeah.
Why is the flyweight division going down?
Amazing when you think about it. But no. Obviously the crowd was there for Conor McGregor, but that was his first big test at the time, and just seeing an entire. Yeah,
he was co-main. What was he co-main?
Wasn't even co-main.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And Donald Cerrone were the co-main.
Yeah.
But the entire crowd was there for McGregor. It was just filled with Irish people who showed up just before the McGregor fight. A lot of them left after the McGregor fight, and they were the entire week were singing in the streets, waving flags everywhere. And my last name being Murphy, we had all kinds of problems with the hotel desk because there were so many people with our names. My dad's name, in particular, we had so many people with that specific name that we couldn't even get sorted out. So
was like John Murphy or something? Or,
David Murphy.
David Murphy.
So there was quite a few people by that name checked into the hotel. Yeah. So a lot of mistakes were made. But yeah, just a massive Irish contingent even before anybody really. Like, people, had opinions of whether McGregor was good. I certainly had bought into the narrative that McGregor was a legit fighter at that point, but he really hadn't been tested.
Yeah. Yeah, because he had been, who had he fought before that? Because he had fought Brandao. I think he had fought Swanson already. Because not Swanson. Holloway. Because that's when he tore his ACL. Holloway was his second fight.
His
first fight was Brimage.
Yeah. And I think those, I might be forgetting one, but I want to say those were the three that he had before.
I'm pretty sure that's the three he had, because I remember because he had fought Brimage, Lichtenpress. Brimage has been like on the receiving end of like
Yeah.
many people's coming out. Like it's unfortunate.
Yeah, Garbrandt,
Yeah.
and Rivera.
Yeah, Garbrandt, Rivera, and McGregor. Just
Yeah.
like, oh man, just bad timing. And then because I remember he fought Brimage, it came out, that was all big. The 50G speech, and then he fought Swanson in Boston. I remember that.
Oh yeah, Holloway in Boston.
Yeah.
And...
I mean, yeah, I kept saying Swanson, but yeah, Holloway in Boston. It took a year, because he tore his ACL, and Holloway was nowhere near where he was at that time. Because I think, if anything, I think he might have been on. Was that a losing? No, I don't think a losing streak. But
I think that started as losing streak. Because I want to say he lost a really iffy decision.
He lost to Bermudez
right after that.
right after that, and then that's when he began his long win streak that continued. Yeah, and then that is kind of the shift of when Conor McGregor entered I guess not everyone, but entered more of a mainstream, because I think that was his first. Because I remember, I think Brimage was either a prelim or at least, or maybe even a fight night.
I want to say it was a prelim on Fuel TV.
Yeah,
at the time.
yes, back when they were showing fights on Fuel TV.
Or Fuel TV was even a thing.
Yeah, because Fuel TV used to be Fox, or did they convert that?
I think it used to be Fox Sports 2 or something like that.
Yeah,
it was one of the very low tier Fox stations.
Fox channels, yeah, and then. Okay, then I remember, because I know the Holloway one was also Fight Night or something like that, Fight Night Boston.
And I want to say that was a prelim too, because I remember they did the whole light experience with McGregor, where they dimmed they made the lights green and everything, and I remember that being such a big deal for a prelim fight.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that is pretty exciting. It's just seeing a fighter come up through the ranks like that. What I guess other than the ones we mentioned already, I guess we mentioned some prominent fighters, some Jose Aldo, Fedor, Conor McGregor. I guess what other fighters, or do you specifically recall that you just enjoyed their narrative, or that you became fans of them watching the sport?
Yeah. Well, the first one that comes to mind is Korean Zombie, and part of that is because he fought last weekend.
Yes.
And when you
talk about things that you'd never expect coming.
Absolutely. I mean, that fight with Yair Rodriguez is a perfect example of the difference between a narrative within a fight and a narrative outside a fight. Because I've been a fan of Korean Zombie since the WEC days. He was one of the fighters that I remember just tuning into some of those WEC cards and remembering his name, because he knew how to brand himself. That name is super catchy. Walking out to the Cranberry song and having the logo on his shirt, and that was the first MMA shirt I ever bought, which I think is true for probably a lot of people. Because that was just such a distinct logo, and then remembering that every time he fought, it was going to be something special. He was in so many action fights, and then recently with the Yair Rodriguez fight, it's here's this up and coming prospect who had hit kind of a tailspin against Frankie Edgar and had been out a while and had all the contractual issues with the UFC,
which is real confusing. Is he going to Kamboch, or what's happening?
Absolutely. And Korean Zombie has obviously been out for significant amounts of time as well, with his injuries and military service, and so going in, there was a compelling narrative where you weren't really sure what was going to happen in that fight between two guys who I really like to watch, and two very exciting fighters, and then of course the narrative within that fight of just all of the twists and turns and back and forth action going on, and change of momentums culminating in a fight that Korean Zombie was winning, and then rushing him in the last few seconds and getting knocked out with just a Hail Mary move with 1 second left. But to answer your question, Korean Zombie was someone, because of all of his action fights, because of the twister early on in the UFC, his fights
against Garcia.
Yep, and his fights with Leonard Garcia and
the Dustin Poirier fight.
Absolutely. I was a huge fan of him. I was a fan of Shogun in part because Tad was a huge fan of Shogun, so he was one of the fighters.
Tad likes
he showed
Pride?
me.
No, I'm just kidding.
Believe it or not, he does.
Tad likes Pride and Japanese fighters. If you're a Japanese Pride fighter, then Tad. Yeah.
But Shogun was one of the odd fighters where you would be able to show highlights of him back in his heyday in Pride, and then still be able to watch him do pretty remarkable things in the UFC. Like
Yeah.
Shogun's one of those fighters where
Yeah, because he was so young when
Yep.
in Pride. That's true. I remember that. Anyway, it's your point. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
seeing him in Pride and then able to translate some of that like in the UFC.
and become a pretty different fighter. Like Shogun
Yeah.
today is a much better boxer, a much trickier fighter than he was back in the Pride days, where he
Mhm.
was just this all-out vicious fighter who was using stomps and a lot of the different rule sets that you would see in Pride to his advantage.
Yes. Yeah, that's really what the Shooter box was known for. Well, the very aggressive Muay Thai, and then of course the soccer kicks and foot stomps, which were prominent in Pride, or also allowed in Pride. But yeah, I guess that's an interesting caveat. I guess like the evolution of not just fighters, but I guess of like techniques themselves. So I
Yeah,
guess
absolutely.
what would you say? I mean, clearly the the talent level has risen since you started watching. But I guess like what are some what are some trends, or what do you think is like what do you think is one of the biggest differences, I guess, watching MMA like modern as opposed to when you started?
I think the most obvious one is that it's much more of a striking sport today than it was when I started watching,
Yes.
particularly in terms of traditional martial arts.
Yeah.
You see a lot of people, whether it's the first one, because we talked about Conor McGregor,
Yeah.
is a great example of that. But I can think of just guys like Kyoji Horiguchi, Justin
Yes.
Scoggins,
Yeah.
and
Wonder Boy Thompson.
absolutely. Israel Adesanya
Yeah.
is an up and
Robert
comer.
Whitaker as well.
And,
Yeah.
Yep. Who are strikers and oftentimes very traditional strikers, and we mentioned a couple of karate fighters in there, who have learned how to do that in a way where they can stop takedowns with largely their footwork. It seems like
Yes.
like they don't need to they don't spend a lot of time on the fence.
Yeah.
And obviously, when I started watching back in 2009, you saw. It's easy to say a lot more grappling, but you saw a lot more the idea of a pure striker, or someone who would spend as much time as some of the fighters we mentioned, or on the feet, was like that was kind of silly to think about. Like almost all of the champions were people where either they would do it all, or they were primarily wrestlers, or you would have occasionally someone like Lyoto Machida, who was more of a traditionalist, but largely it would be much more well-rounded fighters, it seemed like. And now the type of when I think of a well-rounded fighter, oftentimes it is someone who is a specialist in their own area but can defend against everything else.
Yeah. That's true. I think especially just the school of striking is definitely different, or what a striker is, because I guess like striking like 10 years ago was pretty rudimentary. It was especially like as far as takedown defense, like it was just the classic Chuck Liddell like sprawl and brawl.
Absolutely.
Essentially, and it's very very different. Like what counts as a high level MMA striker nowadays. Like from there.
Yeah, like you would never see anybody throwing the kinds of spin kicks or wheel kicks, or obviously it was a huge deal when Anderson Silva threw a front kick against front kick to the head against Vitor Belfort. But nowadays we see that every so often. But even less flashy techniques like double jabs and there's
a jab in general.
Honestly, the jab in general. You see a lot more jabs in MMA today than you used to.
Yes.
You used to see a lot of anytime I see a fighter where they're throwing a left hand, then a right hand, left hand, then a right hand, that reminds me of a lot of MMA or just a random UFC fighter that I would see in 2009.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah, it's definitely it's just in that level. It's very it's very. I guess it's pretty eye opening, because you kind of forget, but especially just watching. I mean, just watching like old fights, you realize, oh wait, the skill level was just different. Like back, I mean, I guess WEC it was an interesting collection, because there happened to just be like a large amount of fighters who ended up being very relevant, like to even modern day. I mean, we listed a bunch of them, right? Like Jose Aldo, Cub Swanson. Korean Zombie just fought in the main event. Like a lot of even Donald Cerrone and Anthony Pettis.
Same card.
Yeah, we're all all still relevant fighters, which just shows like the talent level that they happen to have. But yeah, it's different. Yeah, it's like there's definitely the striking has definitely changed a lot, and I think it does go to that footwork, and I think it's just it's just way more layered as far as I guess because the grappling I guess 'cause I think a big part of it how I would see is the grappling part isn't much of a mystery anymore because it used to be. I mean that was the biggest thing, like that was one of the things that the UFC was known when early days, like coming out, like the importance of grappling. But then once I get it's like it comes in waves, like for sure. Like once that wave of hey, like I guess we realize what we should actually learn how to do this ground fighting thing.
Submissions are legitimately rare now.
Yes.
Like Donald Cerrone caught Mike Perry in an armbar, I believe, last weekend. When was the last time you saw an armbar in the UFC?
Yeah, I mean probably only a hand. Like I mean there are some cards when I don't even see a submission.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like happen. Yeah, unless it's like heavyweight and is someone getting Ezekiel choke. But,
that's true. Alexia, like you probably not surprise me if in the time where Alexia Oleinik has been in the UFC, the difference between the number of Ezekiel chokes and armbars in the UFC is probably smaller than most people think.
For sure, I would say I would wager that really the most submissions you're either gonna see is either at heavyweight, or I'm trying to think, or maybe I'd say women's strawweight.
Yeah, women's would probably be a lot more because it is a much more grappling centric division, or all those divisions are more grappling centric.
For sure, and I guess like I think that's a good thing to talk about like skill level wise, because heavyweight of course is like in the prehistoric ages of like skill level. It's like I feel like you can still
all those fighters are literally prehistoric.
Are literally prehistoric. Yes, like pretty much all the fighters that were relevant in 2009 are still fighting.
Yes.
At heavyweight. So, yeah, and then on the caveat, or on the other hand of that, there's like the women's division, which is fairly new and like you said more grappling centric. It is more like what MMA was like in like 10 years ago.
Yeah,
like
it is.
From there. Yeah,
evolving quickly, but yes,
for sure. Yeah, for sure evolving quickly, but still, more, I guess, more grappling centric. And I'd say maybe I think a large pool of that, or how I would attribute that, is just in terms of just less, I guess, athletic talent, I would say, or it's in terms of like size pool wise. I feel like it's just more. An athlete is just more likely to be found like would end up finding themselves in like in like either the light in like the men's weight classes. I don't know how best to say this, but
when we look at the difference between when a fighter is signed to either the UFC or Bellator or a major promotion in the women's divisions compared to the men's divisions, and you can get signed to those promotions within a couple of fights. If you're someone who is a supremely athletic fighter or someone who can finish in the women's divisions, you have a very high chance of being signed within a couple of fights because you show that kind of talent. You should be snatched up by those promotions. Like that kind of talent, if you're showing that already, you should be fighting relatively good competition right away. And if you're bidding for those kinds of fighters, you need to go and get that, or you need to go and be bidding on that type of talent. But if you're in lightweight, for example, men's lightweight, if you're 4 fights into your career, there is no way that the UFC is going to sign you if you're a lightweight.
Pretty rare. Yeah.
Like exceptionally rare, unless you're fighting CM Punk or something.
Exactly, fighting CM Punk, or I don't know, you're Sage Northcutt, or
and even Sage Northcutt, I want to say had more than 4 fights
or something. I think
I want to say had 7 or 8 fights. Like he obviously was very green, but even Sage Northcutt was such a, and I'm glad you brought up Sage Northcutt because Sage Northcutt is someone where if he was a heavyweight or in the women's divisions or in a division that was less populated, Sage Northcutt would not have looked nearly as bad.
Oh no, for sure. Honestly, like the way you said, like he would be a title contender really if he was a heavyweight.
Probably because you look at the problems that he had. His biggest issue was that he would get pinned up against the fence. He would get taken down. He just was not developed. He was a supremely athletic fighter who was relying almost entirely on athleticism. And you look at where a lot of the mid-tier and above fighters are in some of the weaker divisions, and that's you can go pretty far with that. You look at top 10 light heavyweights, and they're Ovince St. Preux is a fighter who relies a lot on athleticism, or at least for a lot of his career he did. Maybe not as much now, but but you would see fighters and prospects who are able to rise. You look at some of the young heavyweights that are there. Francis Ngannou is a great example of someone who is
young
incredibly green.
Who's 30.
Young heavyweight is 30. But,
which is young at heavyweight.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not 40 yet? You got plenty of time.
But you don't have to. But if you're a lightweight, everybody who is signed to the UFC in lightweight and welterweight is going to face stiff wrestling tests on the regional scene because there's so many people who know how to wrestle there. If you're a heavyweight, good luck finding a heavyweight who can wrestle on the regional scene who hasn't been picked up by the UFC within a couple of fights, and same in the women's divisions.
Yes. Yeah. I know. Yeah. That is an I guess the talent display. Just talent pools like for there.
Yeah, it's a much different size, and I think that's why we say the women's division is growing fairly rapidly. Why we have a fight coming up like Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Valentina Shevchenko, which is an extremely compelling fight in my opinion. That was not something that I think we would have thought of, or that level of competition I think we would have thought of within 5 years ago in women's divisions.
That would not have been possible for sure, or I guess would especially that talent level.
Because a division like strawweight is growing pretty rapidly, the talent pool is increasing quite a bit.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, just like how it's I guess how like you said, how the talent pool is developing in terms of like the striking aspect, because I feel especially with the women's division, a lot of those fighters are had specialties like in other, like for example, like the two women you mentioned, Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Valentina Shevchenko, both were Muay Thai and kickboxing based, but then MMA is just happened to be a more profitable sport, and that's what had them made the move to MMA, and I think that's happening, I guess on just on both sides. Like you have I guess like the Mackenzie Derns who are heavily grappling and then realize, oh, there's more to have in MMA, and then this on the other side, like striking, oh, there's just more for MMA, which has definitely caused like an influx of talent for sure.
Definitely. And in the men's divisions, you would see that very early on with so many wrestlers who would wrestle in high school. The very select few would wrestle in the Olympics. And then after that, it's like, well, what do you do with the skill after that? MMA is the very clear answer, but high schools are generally not going to have women's wrestling specifically. It's you're wrestling with men most of the time, and so you're going to have a much smaller pool to draw from in terms of just women who grew up wrestling or doing some sort of traditional martial arts, and so you're not going to have as many people who naturally are going to find MMA. And I think now, because MMA for women is becoming more profitable, you're seeing exactly that, where you're seeing female kickboxers and female boxers, Heather Hardy in Bellator, who has had mixed results, but
she was a professional boxer and then went over
and is an exceptional boxer, and obviously Holly Holm in the UFC coming over and finding MMA more profitable for them.
And I guess since we're talking about women's MMA, I mean there was a pretty prominent figure that I would say was pivotal in making it into the UFC. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, because when did Ronda fight? Was that 2013? I think it was fairly within
that.
5 years,
2013,
something like that.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really, I guess, the women's division just in that span of time has really looked so much more different. It really, just in those 5 years, it's grown easily as much. It's getting to the point where it's almost right up where I'd say not quite yet, but it's looking pretty comparable to where I guess men's MMA is right now. So I guess what do you because didn't you have a project that involved, or a school project that involved mixed martial arts?
I did, when I was in college, I did a program in college about art theory, and I wrote about mixed martial arts, and I know that the obvious connection to that would be is mixed martial arts and art, but I wanted to dive deeper than that. My project was essentially let's assume mixed martial arts is an art, and then let's critique it as an art. Let's look at various aspects and theories of art theory, and then apply it to MMA. And it actually it worked really well as a school project, because it allowed me to show that I understood the material, because I could be like, okay, here's all these different authors I've read, and then let's apply it to something that no one else has really applied it to. So
Yeah.
so for me, it was great because I got to talk about something I love, but then also show my professors, hey, I really understand this work that I'm reading. And so but yeah, I actually used the first Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate fight as an example of
back in
that.
Strikeforce.
Yeah, back in Strikeforce as one of the fights that I used for one aspect of the project, and really like looking at really kind of diving deep into specifically if you look at kind of that fight frame by frame and looking at it as a piece of art, what's going on in this. And there's a lot there. There's a lot has been written about art theory, believe it or not.
Yeah. What? Okay. And then I guess what are some of the what are some of the big points that you had specifically like in art concerning that fight? Yeah.
Well, so in general, one of the things that I drew from is there's a scholar named Lewis Hyde who used to write about, or had a book about folklore, and specifically he talked about tricksters in folklore. And one thing that he talked about was tricksters and trackers, and his argument was that tricksters and trackers were essentially a metaphor for literature and the way that we engage with literature, that writers are tricksters and readers are trackers. And so as writers write, they're trying to essentially make a story, or write a story and write folklore that is going to have some sort of tricks, for lack of a better term, but are going to make the reader think. And that's how drama works. That's how the relationship between reading and writing works, is you're trying to engage in something where you don't know what's going to happen coming up.
Okay.
And what I looked at is like, okay, so if you think of MMA as an art piece, how does that relationship work between fighters? And fighting is interesting in that regard, because essentially if fighters are artists and they're critiquing their art, which is something that I've heard from fighters, that they fight to, not in necessarily those terms, but they critique their skills.
Yeah.
That they go in and they're trying to test their skills against an opponent, and that's one of the reasons that people fight. Is essentially they're acting as both a trickster and a tracker. That they're trying to read their opponent while also trick their opponent. And that you basically have to do both of those things in fighting, because if you're not tricking your opponent, you're not providing any sort of offense. You're essentially not doing anything.
Yeah.
But if you're not tracking your opponent, you're at risk of getting knocked out. You're running in, you're doing the Korean zombie. You're running in, and you're not fully cognizant of what your opponent is doing, and you're getting hit by an upward elbow and getting knocked out. And so I talked about that in relationship to the Miesha Tate and Ronda Rousey fight, as far as just some subtle moves that Rousey was doing, as far as like at one point in the fight she was using ground and pound, not for the purpose of actually trying to knock Miesha Tate out. She wasn't throwing this hard ground and pound trying to finish her with those strikes. She was trying to set up an armbar. She was trying to annoy Miesha Tate, trying to get Miesha Tate to divert her attention, trying to get Miesha Tate to basically put her arm in a place where she could grab onto it. She was tricking Miesha Tate into putting her arm in a disadvantageous position so she could set up her next move. But at times Rousey would also, with some of her inexperience in MMA, would leave herself open. She was not tracking what Miesha Tate was doing, and so Miesha Tate would find ways to escape, because that was the first fight where we saw Rousey not just immediately get an armbar, and we would see scrambles where Tate would stand back up, and on the feet Rousey would get pretty pieced up by Miesha Tate at times.
Standing up. Yeah.
So that's kind of an example of what I would talk about in that fight in specifically.
That's interesting. And I think, I definitely agree with that trickster tracker comparison, especially like in MMA. And I think that's interesting how you brought up that fight, or especially just the notions in that fight, because if anything, that's really a microcosm for Rousey's career, especially just how it went down, that she was just able, I wouldn't say necessarily cover up her deficiencies. I guess she kind of did.
Yeah.
Like her strengths really were able to overwhelm the people that it could affect, and then her deficiencies were just very prominent when it just became really well known what she was good at. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mention that, because after college I tried for a little bit to write about MMA.
Yeah.
I kind of stopped doing that within a year, but I tried for a little bit to write about MMA, and one of the pieces I did write was a piece that was not a full-on pick for Holly Holm. I want to be very clear. I did not pick Holly Holm to beat Ronda Rousey, but it was a piece.
Bryce knows.
But it was a piece saying, I think it was titled something of like Rousey versus Holm putting a dent in perfection is what I called it.
I think I remember that.
And it was basically looking at those fighters and saying, here is kind of the illusion that we have towards Ronda Rousey.
Mm-hmm.
Here is what she does well. And here is why I think Holly Holm is going to. It wasn't even centered around give her problems, although that was kind of the crux of it. But it was how it was kind of a piece that was targeted towards people who don't watch as much MMA and people who I knew were going to be interested in that fight because it was Ronda Rousey, and saying she is going to look different in this fight because Holly Holm is going to piece her up.
Yeah.
Because we are so used to, at the time, seeing Ronda Rousey charge into the clinch, being physically dominant towards her opponents, fighting people who don't have the tools to be able to circle off of her.
Yeah.
And she's able to bull rush them into the clinch. And as she's added just very small adjustments, like being able to add just a small jab where opponents will bite on that and throw an overhand right, and she can get them into the clinch through that. She's been able to knock people out even faster, throw them even faster, put them in the clinch even faster, and from there it's all over. And this was a fight where just on paper it didn't make any sense for Holly Holm to immediately be bull rushed. She was too physically strong. She had too good of footwork, I guess, for lack of a better term, but she came from a boxing background
I guess better footwork definitely than the opponents that she was used to.
Yeah. She was a southpaw, so she wasn't going to, obviously step in and throw an overhand right when Rousey jabbed.
Yeah.
Like just from the pure dynamics of the fight, it was going to be a tougher battle for Rousey to get there. And Rousey at that point, like, keep in mind that at that point, that was when Joe Rogan was starting to call Rousey a world-class striker, and that was kind of at the build-up of where everybody was starting to talk about Rousey as a knockout artist.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be like, whoa,
let's
take a step back. She's not going to look like a world-class striker in this fight. She probably will get it done, but she'll get pieced up doing it. And of course, obviously, she didn't get much done at all in that fight.
No, but no, for sure. And I think you're not necessarily picking Holm, but I think just dispelling the mystique about.
Yeah.
Because there was just a lot of there was just a lot of hyperbole about Rousey at the time, but especially that world class striking, and but then that's so relative, I guess. It's like one of those catch-all terms, like what is world class striking, from there. And I guess it is relative, I guess. I mean, because for her era, her striking wasn't horrible.
No,
for sure. And then
she was knocking people out. A lot of that was because she had supreme athleticism in comparison to her opponents.
For sure. Yeah, and then that was but definitely I think just the Rousey effect had influenced like a lot of women coming into MMA, for sure. And it's I guess it's it's interesting to see. I guess, like, speaking of other narratives, like, I guess what are other fights, or I guess fighters that stay prominent in your memory that we haven't mentioned yet?
That's a good question. Well, right now the one that comes to mind, because I will say right now I've not been as invested in MMA narratives lately. I think that in the last year and a half, the UFC, kind of since WME purchased it, I think that they've had a more difficult time building narratives to people like me who want the more traditional contender rises, hierarchy of a division. Some of the things I talked about with the reasons why I got into the sport, that's not quite as much. It's a lot more about draws now. It's a lot more about interim champions and instant rematches, and it's not quite as clear cut as it used to be. And so And so when I think about like a modern fighter that I am invested in their narrative, Israel Adesanya is someone
yes.
that I like quite a bit, and some of that was because I, for a very brief period of time, tried to get into kickboxing.
I think
I couldn't. I will say straight up, I could not. I found kickboxing to be not nearly as exciting as MMA and boxing.
It's very European.
It is very European.
It's the thing. That's the thing I can most equate it to. It's very. I mean, not to. It is. It's like for football or like European. It's like it's that's the audience I believe it's geared towards to, and I think that's why it stayed so prominent in Europe, because really that's how it's just it's just how it's
it's
packaged.
It's a very Dutch style. It's very like a lot of fighters are the same, which is one of the reasons why Adesanya stood out to me, because at that time when I was trying to get into Glory kickboxing, Adesanya was fighting for a title. To be completely honest, I don't even remember who he was fighting for a title against. It was whatever the champion was at that.
Yeah, I think it was like middleweight something with the title. Yeah.
And he lost the fight, but I remember just his the types of wild strikes that he was doing, combined with obviously very good timing, and doubling and tripling up on his jabs, really light footwork. He was a great example of a very, for lack of a better term, technical striker, but someone who clearly knew what he was doing, who would throw in a lot of wild techniques. He wasn't the prototypical like MMA fighter, like the Yair Rodriguez kind of thing, where like he's doing all these wild techniques, and I love that and find that exciting. But it's hiding a lack of fundamentals. Adesanya was someone who had all of these fundamentals, and then would add all these more ridiculous and kind of an eye-catching techniques on top of it. And so that was something that in a landscape of kickboxing where a lot of people had very similar styles, at least to me, to kind of an untrained eye, that really stood out. And then to see him kind of at a young age go into MMA, have the kind of success that he has, and have a very clear progression from fight to fight. Where his first fight, you saw that he was having trouble getting off of the fence.
It was all within this year, but
exactly. Which is wild to think about. But then now, people can't even get him to the fence. It's very difficult to even.
And he's facing much better competition.
Yeah, too. I mean, Derek Brunson is a guy who, when he loses, he looks bad. But he's a very good fighter. He takes a lot of high level fighters down, and will knock out most mid tier fighters.
For sure. Yes. And and I think that's very interesting. Like from there, I think Adesanya. And I think just in general, I guess take a step, just looking at kickboxing, it's interesting to me anyway, just knowing like the history of it, seeing how really Dutch, for some reason, the Dutch style didn't really translate into MMA that well as far as like the fighters. Like I'm thinking, I mean, Gokhan Saki. But I think it's just something about it I feel really relies on the rules of kickboxing, specifically like the really big gloves. And it's interesting to me how the people that translated have been mainly fighters that haven't been from the Netherlands that really did well in MMA. Thinking Crow Cop. I'm thinking for some reason, I don't know, Australia and New Zealand, they produce like these good, or for one reason or another, guys that then translated into MMA, because I know Adesanya trains in, I believe, New Zealand or something like that.
I think he does. I know that he lives there currently. So I believe he trains there.
I know him and Dan Hooker are on the same team, and then also like another old one, Mark Hunt. Well, who's still relevant. I mean, Crow Cop and Mark Hunt both did fight this year. So
that's true. Amazingly.
Somehow amazingly. But whereas it's hard for me to really think of somebody that was that translated well, I guess. Alistair Overeem. But but I think he was an MMA, but I feel that's the thing, it's hard to tell like what came first, because he was an MMA fighter first, who happened to be Dutch, and then happened to do
Overeem's career would take an entire podcast to
dissect. But still,
he's one of the most interesting men to be a part of MMA.
It's yes, for sure. Just his story, and then the way his fights go down. Like I said, I've never seen somebody grab defeat from the jaws of victory, just like Alistair Overeem. But yeah, anyway, yeah, no, more overtime on Adesanya. Yeah, yeah, but I think that's the thing when you talk about narratives. It's the way that the UFC's been doing it. It's nothing. It's nothing really. I don't know. I guess the matchups. I guess could be like how helped Adesanya, but I feel like a lot of it really is like something he did on his own.
Yeah.
He went out of his way to really create his narrative and made himself I guess accessible to the people.
Yeah.
And then his story, people just are aware of him, like from there. And I think that's pretty rare, like nowadays. There's just so many, which is funny to think because there's just so many volume of MMA that you think that you would that by the numbers thing that you just happen to know more fighters, but I feel that the opposite is true. Like I feel like I know less fighters than I did when I started.
I absolutely know. Like I know more fighters now than when I started in 2009, but at my peak in the 2015, 2014 kind of years, I certainly know less fighters now than I did back then. And I think Adesanya is unique because he's both a unique fighter in the cage with his kickboxing background and just some of the things we talked about. He doesn't fight like anybody else in MMA currently.
Yes.
And then he's a unique personality outside of the cage. The way that he carries himself on the mic, the way that he conducts himself in interviews on MMA shows afterwards is very unique and compelling. He can carry a conversation and has he has a great story, but is also a naturally funny person.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, and you alluded to this, he's fighting all the time.
Yes.
Which is a huge thing. I mean, Donald Cerrone fought last week. To bring him up again, he's someone who's the prototypical answer for who fights the most in MMA.
Yeah, I mean he solidified that win because he has the most wins in UFC history.
Yeah, exactly.
And most finishes as well in terms of exciting. And also, I guess, volume of fights as well. I mean, Korean Zombie, as you mentioned, had just a myriad of injuries, and then also as well as military service, which just kept him out of the public eye from there.
And a huge reason why people know Cerrone is that same kind of combination. He has that as well, where unique fighting style or exciting fighting style, unique personality out of the cage, and then also just fights all the time, and so you remember him and you remember that personality and that fighting style. And Adesanya right now is on track to do that same sort of thing. Just the more that you're in there, the more people remember you. You have to show yourself to an audience because people are not going to go and try to find you, and it's harder and harder than ever to actually even if you're trying, it's harder and harder than ever to actually find who you want.
If anything, the volume of the events makes it harder to stand out.
Yeah.
If you don't fight that often. I guess speaking of fighters that fight like pretty often, I mean one that I do know, and I know you're a fan of him as well, is fighting soon, Max Holloway.
Yes, that's a great example.
It's a great example of that as he rose his way, and I guess almost I guess kind of unique example because while Cowboy was well known, his success in the top tier has been mixed.
Yeah.
Like well, I guess not mixed. He's typically just struggled against the top, arguably like top 5. He's struggled with. Whereas Holloway has been able to rise like through the ranks and is currently a champion. I mean, faced some health scares for sure.
Yeah.
I mean that we're still
Very
not quite
scary.
sure. But as far as his like rise, it's pretty yeah. Well, that's the thing. I'm always like surprised like why Holloway isn't more popular because than he should be. But I feel that's especially mainstream. Like
I think some of that is just that even though he was fighting all the time, it was on so many different platforms. Like he kind of fought at the crux where you had UFC Fight Pass, you had UFC on Fox, you had pay-per-views, and he was also on prelims a lot. And
and he was on Facebook prelims a lot. I remember back then. Yeah.
And so he won all of these fights
in
a row, but it is what it is. Yeah, he's fighting all these different cupcakes.
Yeah, all these cupcakes. What about cupcakes?
But so for me, it's like I've loved Max Holloway, and so he was always a must watch fighter for me.
For sure.
But for a lot of people, he was just kind of a guy on a card. And Holloway, I think now you're starting to see a much more unique personality. But when he was coming up, I don't know if, as much as I love Max Holloway, I don't know if he necessarily had the immediate kind of swagger that someone like Adesanya
had.
No,
he definitely did not have the charisma for sure.
Yeah.
Like
And now he just exudes that kind of confidence. Maybe not to the level of someone like Adesanya, and he may not have the same kind of one-liners. But like Holloway is obviously a supremely confident person who knows how to carry himself.
Yeah.
But at the time coming up, he was always, I'll face who I face. He wasn't necessarily calling people out, and so I think it was a little bit harder for people to remember him, especially moving from all of these different platforms.
Yeah.
I think eventually people who were like following MMA like started to figure out that like this guy is really good and needs to be watched, but I think just when you look at like pay-per-view draws in general, because we talk about Adesanya, I don't even know that I'm pretty confident Adesanya is obviously not a pay-per-view draw, and I don't know that even any of this is going to culminate in him actually being a pay-per-view draw. To be completely honest with you, I have no idea how the UFC creates pay-per-view draws with their current climate. Unless they luck into another Conor McGregor, who is just like an absolute genius at marketing himself,
exactly,
like, beyond the level of what you can imagine from a human being. I have no idea how you get a pay-per-view star.
That's the thing. It's hard to stabilize. Yeah, because they're trying to catch lightning in a bottle. That's the way I say. And then I mean McGregor is like such a single, I don't know, generational kind of thing. And then on the same token, I guess like that Ronda Rousey effect too was like one of those. I mean the other big pay-per-view draw, Brock Lesnar, that's really really like WWE.
Yeah, exactly. Had a built-in fan base from WWE already, and a built-in fan base who was used to shelling out for pay-per-views.
Exactly. They're used to that the pay-per-view market. Like from there. I guess like who else like is a big pay-per-view? I guess GSP, but I think that's the thing. It's arguable because is he really the draw? Is it just that he's been in it so long and that he just has a big Canadian fan base? Because like that's the thing. I don't think GSP would, if you put him like 10 years later, like if he came out 2014, I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I think it's a unique scenario.
Yeah, and the GSP Bisping fight did well, but some of that was the intrigue of GSP had been gone for so long.
Yeah.
And like if GSP was a champion who was fighting every 3 months, I'm honestly not sure that GSP would in each of his fights be drawing that well. And I could be completely wrong about that, but
I know there's angry Canadians listening right now. Spitting out their maple syrup.
I like GSP. I'm glad. That fight with Bisping was a really exciting moment. One of the most exciting that MMA has had from a narrative standpoint in a long time. But
the most exciting cards for sure.
Yes, that was a great. Three title fight card.
Because that was when Paige beat Joanna.
Yes.
When Dillashaw beat Garbrandt.
Yeah.
And then it culminated with
three titles changing hands.
Three titles changing hands in emphatic fashion.
Yeah.
That was I definitely one of the biggest cards I remember in memory. But anyway, so GSP. That's the thing. Yeah, it is the. We haven't seen him, and how's he gonna look? From there.
And like John Jones is kind of like a mid-tier star. Like he's not gonna put up Conor numbers, but Jones does well, particularly.
And I think it's kind of on the same token too. Like, Jones messed up again. Can he come back? Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, Johnny, he messed up again, but can he come back?
Yeah, John Jones always finds his way into mainstream news.
Yeah.
Not for the right reasons.
Not for the right reasons.
But he gets his name out there.
He does. It's like the. Almost the epitome of no press is bad press.
Yeah, I mean in MMA that's kind of true. Very true, I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean we know all those bad press. Like, I mean one that stands out in mind is the War Machine Bellator about from prison. That's so bad.
That was one being a fan of MMA. There are definitely. Like MMA has its problems, let's say, as a sport.
Yes.
There are some more. I have moral questions about MMA. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And the War Machine advertisements, and for anyone who doesn't remember it, like War Machine
or who avoided it.
Thankfully, it was a long time ago. But War Machine, who is currently in jail for a long time.
Yes.
When he was in jail for a short amount of time.
Yeah. Only assault.
For assaulting a woman.
Yeah.
Was signed by Bellator, and this was during the Bjorn Rebney era, and they ran advertisements trying to promote a welterweight tournament where War Machine's part of the ads where he was in jail, threatening to talking on a phone in prison, threatening to he's going to imagine that the fighter in front of him is the female judge who put him in there, and it's like that. Like, on one hand, that's a disgusting. That's like on its own a disgusting promo to have. But on the other hand, like, watching that made me think, who are the people who are like, what person looked at that and said, yes, this is who the demographic who watches this sport. This is how we're going to attract them to our product. And why am I in this group of people?
Yeah.
Like what does this say about me?
What does this say about me?
That I watch this product. And to be fair, I did not watch War Machine's fights in Bellator. I had no interest in watching War Machine fight. He was not even a particularly good fighter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was maybe my biggest at the time. Look at MMA and the way that it was marketed. Be like, there's something. There's something kind of sick about the way that some of this is portrayed.
For sure. And another one that comes in mind is the Jeff Munson, was it like donkey? Yeah. Yeah, it's just so.
I remember that.
Yeah. Hey, like, what did he say? Like,
seeing people get fucked for free.
Yeah. I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a little more silly. Like,
yeah.
It reminds me of earlier this year there was some like Russian promotion who ran like an obviously very, very fake fight between like a man and a woman.
Oh yeah.
Where it was like very obviously pre-recorded and like set up in someone's back like basement or something, but it was just this whole advertisement of like, can this random dude beat a female MMA fighter? And like that stuff I kind of accept is going to happen because there is definitely still a little bit of the mystique about MMA. It still is a sideshow to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But when you get up to the major promotions where it's Bellator and the UFC, I've always kind of took for granted how much the UFC markets violence, like specifically just raw violence, where they used to have, a Roman gladiator as their character, walking
like the pre thing.
Yeah, in the pre thing, or like, the current everybody hates the Face the Pain.
Face the Pain
music, but think about what that is for a second. It's literally just a highlight of each fighter's most violent moments, rapid fire to this horrible nu metal soundtrack. And that's the way the way that in 2018 this company still chooses to advertise their product. Right. That's still what they think. Yes, this is what our consumers want.
This is what our demographics after.
Yeah.
But and then I remember because I think they went back to the old Face the Pain, but I remember when they had techno Face the Pain.
Yeah.
We're like
for a little bit. For a little bit, they're like, dubstep's still a thing.
Dubstep's still a thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'll get that. And I think. Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about the marketing MMA. Yeah, it's still very. Yeah, that's. I think, I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Because I think I know we can't really call ourselves, like, mainstream MMA, like, consumers, like, from there. So it's I know, I think that, well, that's the thing. I think they're trying to find the pulse of what is a mainstream MMA consumer. I think maybe that is. I know we could be totally wrong, Bryce. Maybe that's the kind of guy we want.
I mean, Limp Bizkit's technically still a band. They still they were touring as of a couple of years ago, so there's still some audience for that.
Okay, well, I guess isn't Insane Clown Posse still a thing?
Probably. Gathering of the Juggalos, I'm pretty sure still happens.
Yeah.
Limp Bizkit probably plays Gathering of the Juggalos for all I know. That sounds like something that would
sounds right. Sounds right. All right, and then let's see. I guess that's. Yeah, the marketing thing. John Jones. Speaking of John Jones, he's fighting again. And I guess
probably fighting again.
Probably fighting it for now.
Yeah.
Underneath some dubious circumstances. There's definitely not all is right in MMA for sure. There's just that there's always been that shady. Actually, there's always been that kind of shadow that's been like cast upon it, but I feel like it's always been there.
It always has, and some of that is combat sports. Like combat sports always has a large shadow over it, and pro sports in general always has a smaller but still significant shadow over it. Yeah. But then MMA has its own set of unique issues as well.
Yeah.
So.
For sure, just the organized crime, like connection. Pride.
Oh yeah.
And then
and then currently with the UFC and the oligarchs and just all of the in the East Caucasus and all of that.
Exactly, like the prominent dictators being very comfortable, or with MMA fighters and
how many people realize that Fabricio Verdum walks out to music from Ramzan Kadyrov's MMA promotion.
Chechnyan dictator, right?
Yeah, the Chechnyan dictator whose sole, like, or not sole, but like
one of his goals.
One of his goals right now is to purge his country of gay people.
Yeah.
And the UFC is perfectly fine with not only signing fighters who come from that promotion and have direct associations with Kadyrov, but also letting Fabricio Verdum be an official ambassador to that promotion and walk out to that promotion's theme song, which just Kareem Zidane is a writer for Bloody Elbow who does fantastic work on that subject and is obviously extremely knowledgeable, much more knowledgeable than I am, but on that, but it is just a little bit of like, so I recommend reading some of his pieces if you want to know more about that, but it is definitely kind of a strange thing of like, you're fine with that, like you're just cool with like very close associations with some of these people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure I don't know how to pronounce his name, Chechen dictator, but I remember him like gifting like Habib like a car. I'm pretty sure I saw that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then it's just in deep there.
It is.
Yeah. The Eastern Caucasus oligarchs. Yep. It's definitely interesting time, but that's how it is. Any fights that we did mention that you are looking forward to? I guess we already mentioned Holloway and Ortega and the maybe John Jones.
Yeah, maybe John Jones fight. Off the top of my head, I'm looking forward to the Cyborg and Nunez fight, even though I'm kind of the opinion that you pick Cyborg in any fight and it's probably not going to be competitive, but just the fact that this seems like probably the best chance of anyone to beat Cyborg. I have no idea what the path to victory for Amanda Nunez is, but just Nunez has been a legitimate champion who has shown obvious knockout power and obviously a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, has significantly more skills and is more well-rounded than any fighter that Cyborg has fought at the wasteland that is 145 pounds for women.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing that, and that's the co-main to the Jones-Gustafsson fight. So that's one. There used to be a time where I would know every single fight or all of the big fights that are happening in the UFC, and now it's like I can remember the headliners and I know the title fights they have booked, but they have so many cards coming up. It's made me where or it's gotten to the point where I just kind of tune a lot of that stuff out until we get to a couple weeks out, and then it's like, okay, and then I look at it for like, is this worth watching or not?
Yeah, should I watch this? Like,
sure.
I remember back when we had the MMA podcast, the Mobile Fight Club podcast.
Oh yeah.
Back, but and I think he was definitely growing towards that when we're like, who are these people?
Yeah.
And now it's definitely gone full. Man, who are most like there was a card last night I didn't pay attention to, but
I did. I will say I did not watch the card last night. Not out of because I had no interest or thought the fights on paper were terrible, just because I was doing other things, and it's really tough for when there's UFC fights going on every weekend to devote 7 hours with their horrible pacing to just to spend that much time out of your day.
I know, that pacing and the commercials and it's just a bad thing. But I think it'll be interesting to see like what they'll do, I guess, moving forward, like from there. Like I'm curious how this ESPN deal like is gonna happen. I feel like that's the 7-hour blocks. It's just not for 12 fights. That's like that's.
I mean, you're looking at that rate. I mean, not even a half hour a fight like that, or more than a half hour a fight.
Yeah.
It's taking like that's
Yeah. That's very excessive.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, hopefully the move to ESPN Plus with a lot of the fights on the streaming platform will be better, because Fight Pass was I was always more tolerant of cards that were on Fight Pass, even with some of the lower tier fighters, because the pacing was very quick.
Yeah, the pacing was quick, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Whereas for like these the FS1 or the Fox Sports one, like when there's a quick finish, like, oh wow, quick finish, and then like, oh no, that means 25 minutes of commercials. Yeah, that's fun.
And when you talk about going back to marketing for a second, that's another big shift that we've seen, because when we talk about how the UFC markets violence, more or less, the UFC has obviously tried to position itself more as a traditional sport. The Reebok deal was a huge part of that. Now the fighters have specific uniforms that look more like the types of uniforms that you would see on a stick and ball sport.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons, I'm sure, why ESPN was more likely to do business with them, because it looks very clean, even if it's not great for the fighters and their finances. But the whole Fox deal in general has progressed more to that, where you have this desk that you return to and analysts that will talk about these things.
Yeah.
But what the UFC hasn't gone all the way. The analysts that the UFC has at the desk are, to put it bluntly, terrible.
Yeah.
And it's not that they don't know what they're talking about. It's that they still have this idea that they have to promote the UFC as everything is good all the time. You never have criticism. You never have this fighter did a poor job at this, or here is a problem with our sport. You never have the kinds of critiques towards either the systems of MMA or specific fighters of MMA that you would see in any other sport. If you watch a football game, you will have commentators who will say more or less, this rule needs to be changed, or this rule is bad, or this was a poor play. Not in those words necessarily,
or like this was a poor decision by this player.
You'll hear things like, this player cannot take a sack in this situation. And in MMA, it's like you still have the idea that every fight is good. Every fight is exciting in terms of the way that it's commentated. You can't be like,
man, this fight's gonna suck. Well,
you wouldn't hear that.
You
wouldn't say
it
like that.
Man, this game's really gonna suck. Don't pay attention.
You wouldn't say it like that. But there is still this feeling of overly defensive feeling on UFC broadcasts, where it's almost like the UFC is kind of parading as a traditional sport. They still haven't fully found that yet, in my opinion, and that makes it even harder to sit through all of their hours of coverage, because it still feels a little bit off. It still feels like you're not watching traditional sports coverage. It feels like you're watching the UFC promotional channel.
No, that's definitely what it feels like. Yeah, as far as I think you hit that pretty spot on. Just that's what makes it so. Yeah, it's almost like a propaganda kind of thing. Like, that's how I imagine the North Korean TV would be. Oh, it's all great. We're all eating so good here. Here in North Korea. But that's I think that's pretty spot on, just in terms of how the analysis. And I think one thing you mentioned, the rules. Just one of the big things about MMA is just how there's this rule set. Like, it's like, oh, it's unified, but not here. And
it's a funny use of the term unified.
Exactly. It's like unified, but only in these states. You know, from there. And then, just with the use of replay, which has led to some pretty, just some pretty awful outcomes.
Even when replay is used, it has the specific limitations, or like how much replay can be used and what happens. Like, maybe it is the same, or it's just applied differently. I have no idea. It seems to me that it varies by state, and varies even by referee.
Varies by referee, or what they decide to do at that time.
If somebody were to ask me, if somebody not watching MMA were to ask me, can they use replay in this instance, I would have no idea what to tell them.
Nope, no idea. And that's like, and that's something that you don't see in traditional sports or in other sports. Like, can you use replay? Well, we are in Florida, so no, we can't.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Or even just with the so-called unified rules. If we were just to turn on an MMA fight and someone were to ask me, okay, what are the rules?
What are the rules?
Yeah. Like I.
Well, cannot record phone calls. Well, that's actually that's pretty much. I'm gonna get going pretty soon, but I think it's been a pretty good interview. So thanks for your time, Bryce.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Cholo. Always great to talk to you.
Yeah, always good. And then thank you, listener, for listening to Pankration Philosophy. Let's see, you can we're on Patreon. I don't know if anyone knows, but also Patreon's a weird spelling. I remember when I searched them, like it's like patron. No, it's like PATREON.
That's right.
Yep.com/Pankration. Donate if you feel like it.